and she was one of the bravest secret agents of the Second World War. I don't know whether they're there to keep the Prime Minister in or members of the general public out. Hello and welcome back to my channel, and the third day of my little summer holiday in London. I went back to that cafe this morning, had a cup of tea, one of those rather delicious breakfast baps as well, full of sausage and bacon, egg and cheese, and it was really rather nice actually, which will keep me filled up for the rest of the day. But I'm taking a walk up the Mall. I've decided to do some more of the touristy things today. Yesterday was a bit of a disappointment with places I want to go to being closed. So I'm going to do all the open air touristy bits today. Look at Buckingham Palace and Houses of Parliament. And along the way we'll discover one of London's execution sites and one of the bravest secret agents of World War II. But the sun's out today, which is rather nice. I hope it continues, and it doesn't rain. I had a few spots this morning as I was walking past the London Eye. It turns out it was actually open yesterday. It's just that I was there a bit early, so I might try and do that on my last day tomorrow in London. So I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do yet, but I haven't finished today yet, so perhaps I'll think about that later. But it's rather nice walking up here. There's little tree-lined avenues on either side of the Mall, and the Mall is red. It's like the red carpet that goes up to the front of Buckingham Palace. The original house was built back in 1703 by the first Duke of Buckingham as his London residence, but it was bought by King George III in 1761 for £21,000. That's roughly, what, 3.5 million, 4.5 million in today's money. It's worth a bit more, I think, to these days. But it's called Buckingham Palace after the Duke of Buckingham, who originally built the house, the main core of the house. But the outside has it's been altered so much in Victorian times, creating the impressive building we see today. But it does look very impressive as you walk up the Mall. Back when the original house was built, all the area around here was fields, and it's called the Mall after the game called Pall Mall, which was an early version of croquet. I'm not sure how you play croquet, or Pall Mall for that matter, but yeah, it's an early racket game, very, very popular in the mid-18th century. But just up ahead here is Buckingham Palace, and the sun's come out and it looks very, very splendid indeed. The house is flying, the palace is flying the Union Jack and not the Royal Standard. If it was flying the Royal Standard, then you know, the Queen would be at home, but it's flying the Union Jack, so she's not at home today. I could have called in for a cup of tea. I'm sure she'd like to meet me. Maybe not, but let's take a look at the outside of the building anyway. Buckingham Palace really is a magnificent building, and such an iconic one for London. At the front here you can see the royal balcony where the royal family appear for special occasions and fly-pasts, and the guards outside all look so immaculately dressed in their smart uniforms and their Busby hats. But outside the front is the Victoria Memorial. It's designed by Thomas Brock in 1901, and it was unveiled on the 16th of May 1911, but wasn't fully completed until 1924. And the memorial commemorates the life of Queen Victoria, who ruled this country for over 60 years. And it really is quite a magnificent memorial indeed. And what a location outside the front of Buckingham Palace. But next to Buckingham Palace is St James's Park, one of the many royal parks that exist in London. So let's take a look at and walk down by side of the lake and see what we can discover in St James's Park. And the sun is still shining, which is brilliant. I just hope it stays that way all day, but we'll wait and see on that one. Let's go down to St James's Park and see what we can find down there. It's rather delightful walking through this park. Hear the birds singing in the trees, and looking at all the wildlife out on the lake, the ducks and the swans, grey lag geese. Even got some pelicans there as well. Pelicans came to London originally about 400 years ago. They were a gift to King Charles II in 1664 by the Russian ambassador. But the lake we see today was created in 1826 by the landscaper John Nash. But it was King James I in 1603 who kept exotic animals, crocodiles, camels, and even elephants. And there are some elephants just up here as well. And having a look at those elephants, they were created in southern India on behalf of the late Mark Shand, who created the Elephant Family charitable organisation. There's some information plaques up there to commemorate his work and that of the foundation. But it's really interesting to see them, and quite an unexpected surprise as well. I knew I'd come here and see the pelicans, but I didn't know I was going to come here and see elephants as well. So there's a bonus. But now let's walk along a little further and see what else we can discover here in St James's Park. Found a little kiosk. There's quite a few in the park, and I found an empty bench. Just sat there watching the birds on the lake, and all the people walking around, going about their business. And then I got caught in the rain. Had to stand under a tree for 10 minutes to let the rain pass. Been dodging the rain for the last few days, but fingers crossed, I'm hoping it'll hold off a bit longer. Forecast is for rain later on this afternoon. But just up ahead of me is the Horse Guards parade ground. It dates from the 18th century. It was designed by William Kent, who was the chief architect to King George II, and it's used every year to host the annual Trooping of the Colour ceremony to mark the official birthday of Her Majesty the Queen. Lots of military buildings that surround it. There's a museum there and a barracks, I think, and quite a few statues as well. It's rather pleasant. I had a walk around there about 6 years ago, and I made a little film. It's one of the first ones I did on my channel. Probably not the best film I've made, but it's a nice little film. It shows the horse guards coming into the parade ground, and yeah, I wonder if they're going to be walking through the parade ground today. But let's head up here now and take a look and see if they're there and see what else we can discover as we head down onto Whitehall towards the Houses of Parliament, one of the most iconic buildings in all of London. It's quite interesting walking around that parade ground. I did like looking at that big cannon they have up there. It's made in 1524 by a man called Murad, son of Abdullah. It was captured in 1801 by the British in Egypt, and it's been there for God knows how many years. But it's quite an impressive piece of artillery. Heading out through to the other part of Horse Guards Parade onto Whitehall. This is really rather nice. Very noisy up here. It would be main thoroughfare through London. It attracts a lot of traffic. Nice young lady on a horse there, one of the guards who were stationed outside the barracks there and the cavalry museum. But across the walls, across the way, is the Banqueting House, and there's quite a history there. And also it's the execution site of King Charles I. The Banqueting House is all that remains of the former Palace of Whitehall, which was once the residence of English monarchs from 1530 to 1698. Work started in 1619 and took 3 years to complete, the building being designed by Indigo Jones. The Banqueting House is known for its ornate ceiling painted by Rubens, and as the execution site for King Charles I. Around 2 in the afternoon, on Tuesday the 30th of January 1649, King Charles I arrived at the Banqueting House. He walked up the stairs, through the banqueting hall, and climbed through the window and out onto the newly erected scaffold outside. There he was beheaded with one stroke of the axe by his executioner, a man called Richard Brandon. The history of the Banqueting House really is impressive. And the ceiling in there is just worth a visit all by itself, just to see the ceiling. It really is wonderful in there. It's all that remains of the old Palace of Whitehall, which used to dominate this area. Just on my right is the entrance to Downing Street, the home of the British Prime Minister, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and other government ministers. When I first came here in 1970, gosh, it was 72, 73. I think Harold Wilson was Prime Minister. Those bars on the front weren't there at the time. I don't know whether they're there to keep the Prime Minister in or members of the general public out. So I just walked up with my grandfather. Walked up to the front of the door and was greeted by a policeman who just politely told us that we couldn't go any further. But how different. All those thick heavy bars on the front and the police presence. Some serious security there. Just on the left is the Cenotaph, Britain's permanent place of memorial for those who lost their lives in conflict. It's originally put up as a temporary monument for a parade, but public outcry wanted a permanent memorial, so that Cenotaph was created. It was designed by Edward Lutyens, and it opened on the 11th of November 1920, and the first person to visit it was the unknown soldier on his way to Westminster Abbey. The Cenotaph is used every year for our main parade and our act of remembrance on the 11th of November. But just ahead of me is a row of telephone boxes. These were designed by Sir Giles Gilbert Scott, who also designed Bankside Power Station, which is now the Tate Modern. I featured that yesterday in my video as I travelled up the Thames on an Uber boat. But just ahead of me is Westminster Abbey, St Margaret's Church, Parliament Square, the Houses of Parliament, and the Great Hall, part of the old Palace of Westminster. Some of the most iconic buildings in the whole of London, and probably in the whole world. Certainly the Houses of Parliament. Let's take a walk around here and see what we can discover, and we'll show you one of the execution sites of London. Around looking at all the statues. There's quite a few. There's Winston Churchill, Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, and Millicent Fawcett, who was a suffragette, and her statue was the last unveiled there back in 2018. But on my left is Westminster Old Hall. It's all that remains of the old Palace of Westminster, and was erected in 1097 by King William II. The first Parliament met there in the year 1265. It's also where King Charles I was put on trial before his execution. Also, William Wallace was tried in there, and so was Guy Fawkes, John Fisher and Thomas More. All were subsequently found guilty and sentenced to death. Oliver Cromwell was Lord Protector of England from 1649 to 1660. His statue stands there in Old Palace Yard, looking across at the back of St Margaret's Church, where there's a bust of King Charles I. Old Palace Yard was one of the execution sites of London. Walking into Victoria Gardens here by the side of the Houses of Parliament. There's a nice statue of Emeline Pankhurst, one of the suffragettes. Suffragette movement in the late 19th century focused on giving equal rights for women, and of course the vote for women as well, which they did eventually get. But she was one of the pioneers of the suffrage movement. It's quite nice that her statue is along with other members of the women's suffrage, like Millicent Fawcett in Parliament Square, are on display. But it's quite nice, these gardens. They were designed in 1870 by the architect Joseph Bazalgette. He designed them as part of the Metropolitan Board of Works to provide London with a more modern sewage system. And somewhere below me, this beautiful grassy area, are all the sewage pipes that Joseph Bazalgette put in. And what a great way to solve one problem, sewage problem, and create a beautiful park at the same time. really rather pleasant here. But down the end is Lambeth Bridge, and we'll cross Lambeth Bridge over the River Thames and into Lambeth, and a very interesting statue to a very brave lady. Before the bridge was built, there used to be a ferry, a horse-operated ferry, which used to transport people from the Westminster side to the Lambeth side. And the road directly behind the bridge, behind me, is called the Horse Ferry Road because of that horse ferry that used to exist. They built a bridge here in 1862, and this current bridge was opened on the 19th of July 1932 by King George V. It's quite interesting because this bridge has red paintwork on the sides, and Westminster Bridge, which is the next one down, has green sides on the bridge, because this denotes the House of Lords and the House of Commons, because the Houses of Parliament are just on my left. On the side nearest Lambeth Bridge is where the House of Lords sit, and the side near the Westminster Bridge is where the House of Commons sits. Hence the green and the red. On the other side of the bridge is the Church of St Mary's. Now, there's been a church here since Saxon times, but a church was recorded in the year 1062 as being founded by a lady called Goda, who was the sister of King Edward I. It's quite a beautiful church, this one. Lovely ornate cladding on the outside. And the tower itself actually dates from 1377. The church closed for regular worship back in 1972 and opened up as a garden museum in 1977. There are a few people who are notable people who are buried here. Former Archbishops of Canterbury. Richard Bancroft, well, he was Archbishop of Canterbury from 1604 to 1610, and he was the chief overseer of the King James Bible. And there are four others: John Moore, Frederick Cornwallis, Matthew Hutton and Thomas Tennyson. There's also the grave in here of Elizabeth Boleyn. She was the mother of Anne Boleyn, the wife of King Henry VIII. The church is now a garden museum, and looks like it's open, and so is the church tower. So let's go up the tower and take a look. Wow, the steps are a bit narrow. There's 131 of them, which go all the way up to the roof. I tend to spend so much of my time climbing church towers. I do find churches such incredible pieces of, well, essentially such incredible historic buildings. I watch my foot because of all the people that have been associated with the church over the years, and all the human stories that they leave behind, and their graves in the churchyard, from ordinary people and ordinary walks of life. Wow, how many more are there? To the rich, the famous, the powerful. You know, in life we're all different, but in death we are all equal. Gosh, nearly at the top. I can see daylight. There we go. the views from up here really are quite spectacular. Look across to Lambeth Bridge, where I've just crossed over, and the great views over looking towards the Houses of Parliament and down onto Lambeth Palace. The view from the top here is probably a lot more impressive a few hundred years ago when the church was built, because most of the dwellings in London would either be single-storey or multi-storey dwellings. So this church would have towered across most of London, and the views across what is the city now would have been quite spectacular. And of course the open countryside to the south of here. It's all built up now, but it would have been open countryside. But now I'm going to make my way downstairs and down onto the embankment to look at a statue to a lady called Violette Szabo, and she was one of the bravest secret agents of the Second World War. Wow, it's absolutely fascinating looking around that museum and going to the tower as well. It's really quite exciting. I've driven past so many times and I've always wanted to go, and finally I was able to stop and pay a visit to this church. And it's absolutely fascinating to see the grave of Richard Bancroft and Elizabeth Boleyn, or Elizabeth Howard as of course she was known. Absolutely fascinating. So much history there as well. Then you found the graves of the former archbishops during renovations. Nobody knew where they were buried. And of course they were just next door to the to Lambeth Palace. But at the front here is Morton's Tower. It's built in 1495 and named after John Morton, who was a former Archbishop of Canterbury. But Lambeth Palace, as it's named, it's been the home of the Archbishops of Canterbury for the past 800 years. They used to live in Canterbury itself in a house called Lambeth House. So when they built the palace here, they transferred the name from Lambeth House to Lambeth Palace. Rather a nice, desirable residence to live in, steeped in history. Quite a shame it's not open to the public, because I wouldn't mind having a nose around there. I'm sure it's absolutely fascinating, especially the chapel that they have in there. This area is actually called the Albert Embankment, and it was created in 1866 by Joseph Bazalgette as part of the Metropolitan Board of Works for their sewage programme. It's really rather pleasant here. But what I've come to see is the statue of Violette Szabo. And here we are, the statue to S.O.E agent Violette Szabo. Special Operations Executive was secretly formed for the purpose of recruiting agents, both men and women, of many nationalities who would volunteer to continue the fight for freedom by performing acts of sabotage in countries occupied by the enemy during the Second World War. On her second trip into occupied France, she was captured. She was tortured and interrogated by the German army and deported to Ravensbrück concentration camp. There she was executed with a single gunshot to the head, and she was awarded the George Cross and the Croix de Guerre, both posthumously. One of the bravest ladies of the Second World War, the bravest agents to be dropped behind enemy lines. So many agents were picked up and shot. Very few made it back alive. Very brave people indeed. And this country and the free world owes a lot to the agents of S.O.E and all those who fought in the Second World War so that we can be free today. On the side of the monument are two other plaques. The first is to the Maquis, the French resistance fighters, and 470 S.O.E agents were sent on sabotage missions to occupied France, where they fought with the networks of French resistance fighters who played an important part in the liberation of France during 1944. And on the other side is a really interesting monument, an interesting plaque indeed. This is the heroes of Telemark. the 1943 Norwegian Resistance Commandos, sponsored by the S.O.E, raided the enemy-occupied Norsk hydro plant in the Telemark region of Norway. This successful raid sabotaged the machinery that was producing heavy water, which was used in the manufacture of an atomic bomb. Thanks to those heroic Norwegian commandos, the enemy's attempt to develop an atomic bomb was thwarted. Had that raid failed, had the Germans developed heavy water, they would have developed the first atomic bomb. They would have won the war, and I'd be delivering this vlog, this video, in German. The raid was dramatised in the film The Heroes of Telemark with Kirk Douglas. Absolutely brilliant film, and depicts quite accurately the events that took place to destroy the machinery that produced the heavy water. And the hydro plant wasn't actually rebuilt until long after the war had ended. But it's here by the statue of Violette Szabo that I end this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, leave a thumbs up, leave a like, leave a comment, and be sure to subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you soon for another adventure, another time.